When I was about 10, we lived in a house that had a basement window that looked out on a walkway to the house and three steps leading up to the landing of the front door. At the base of the steps was a mat. One day, I heard someone walking up the walkway and noticed it was my mother. I looked just in time to see her white spike-heeled pump mash a snail as she walked by the window, then stepped on the mat and went up the three steps. This all happened in a few seconds and left me mesmerized. I couldn't get this snail crushing out of my mind. My mother told me that my aunt would be over Saturday at around 9:30. My aunt was a 110 pounds 21-year-old who loved to wear very sexy, stylish high-heeled shoes and very fashionable clothes. She was single attractive. Well, I knew I had to find some critters to place on the walkway and hope that she and my mother might treat me to a crush fest. Watching my mother trample that snail really inspired me. I could not sleep that Friday and was up early. I found 4 large crickets and 5 snails. At around 9 o'clock, I started playing by the steps and at around 9:20 placed the 4 crickets under the mat. The mat held them in place, but you could see little lumps where they were. Every now and then one of the lumps would move a little. I sat there for a little while preparing to place the snails when I saw my aunt's car pulling up. My mother must have seen it too as she came walking out of the house and down the steps. She stepped squarely on one of the crickets and totally flattened it with the ball of her foot. I sat there for a few seconds, staring at the mat, then quickly composed myself and placed the snails. My mother and aunt talked for a minute or two, and I ran for the cellar. I climbed up on the workbench and waited. I didn't have to wait long till I heard the distinct sound of 2 pairs of high-heel-clad feet clicking their way up the walkway and toward the poor helpless snails and crickets. I looked on in awe as first my mother's left heel grazed one snail, then watched as her right foot mashed one into oblivion. A split second later, my aunt's heel mashed one of the snails as my mother's right heel landed squarely on the mat where one of the crickets was. You could see the dent her heel left where the once was a little mound under which was a living cricket. My aunt was close behind, and she wiped her feet a couple of times on the mat, sealing the fate of the other 2 crickets. Only 3 of the snails survived and none of the crickets made it. I sat there listening to their heels punish the floor right above my head. Then I heard the loud report of my aunt's 4 high-heel sandals as she strode off to the bathroom. A few minutes later, I heard the sound of my mom's heels clicking their way to the living room. Then I heard the TV and my aunt. I went upstairs and saw both of them sitting on the sofa. This was great because on the floor in front of the sofa was a throw rug. I decided to sit down by my aunt's feet. I found that if I laid down just right, I could easily sneak my hand under the throw rug and by her feet. I proceeded to do this and had my hand such that my fingers were on either side of her right heel. I watched in admiration as she rocked her lovely foot on that slender 4 white heel. Then she released her heel off the ground, and I saw my chance. I slid my fingers under her heel. Her heel was so thin that it covered only one finger. She sat there with her legs crossed and just a slight pressure on the heel. Then she stretched both her legs out and slowly brought them back in. I slid my hand around so as to have her heel on it again. As I did, she came down with her right heel on the back of my hand. The weight of her crossed legs was entirely on that heel and the back of my hand now. It was a lot more pressure than I had imagined, and my hand was starting to hurt. She was rocking her foot on that heel and grinding it into the back of my hand as she and my mother watched something on TV. Then a commercial came on, and she slid her foot back about an inch, uncrossed her legs, and was about to stand on my hand when my mother told her to stay there. My mother stood up and walked off to get some coffee. My aunt placed her left foot next to the right one, which now had its heel planted between and just behind my left hand's index finger and middle finger knuckles. She sat like that till my mother came back. Then, before I could think, she stood up. Instantly, I felt an unbelievable amount of pain in my hand as her heel sunk between the bones. She stood there, then shifted quickly from her right foot to her left, then back to her right. She stood with all her weight on her right foot, and my hand then stepped off. But no sooner was her heel off my hand than she turned slightly and stepped on my hand with the ball of her foot, twisted about 90 degrees, and sat back down. Man, did this all hurt. At this point, I decided to pull my hand out. When I finally got my hand out from under the throw rug, I went off to the bathroom to assess the damage. I had a nice bruise and cut where her heel had mashed the back of my hand. Since her heel was not much more than 1/4 square, it left a rather sharp imprint on my hand, even through the throw rug. I was amazed that my 110 pounds aunt could exert that much pressure and pain simply by stepping on my fingers. The neighbor girl, who was also 10 and a bit heavy, had stepped on my hand, but never hurt me like this. This day, I learned a valuable lesson about high heels, and especially those really thin ones like the ones on my aunt's high-heeled sandals.